Hello, and welcome to a very special edition of Trip the Beltway Fantastic. Last week, there was a very brief moment in which it looked like the newly inaugurated President Trump was finally going to allow the declassification of all the files relating to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy in 1963. This has been decades in the waiting, and he has said clearly in interviews during the campaign and after his election that he was going to immediately release these records, of which there are around 3,000 today, sitting in the National Archives and Records Administration. In fact, in a Washington rally the night before his inauguration, Trump declared his administration will, quote, reverse the overclassification of government documents. And in the coming days, we are going to make public remaining records relating to the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, his brother Robert Kennedy, as well as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and other topics of great public interest, end quote. He then issued a much awaited executive order on January 16th that directs the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, and the Attorney General to develop a plan within 15 days to release the remaining JFK records, and within 45 days, a plan to release RFK and MLK cases. But the response to this order has been deflation, not elation. My guest today is going to explain what this order says, what it does, and why it wasn't exactly what we had hoped for. He will also walk us through what has and has not been released already, what he is looking for in the remaining classified and redacted documents, and most importantly, why it is critical that all of the government records of the assassination before and after November 22nd, 1963 are made public. Jefferson Morley is a Washington author and veteran journalist who has been writing for decades about the JFK assassination within the context of official secrecy in Washington's intelligence agencies. He is the author of several nonfiction histories, the most recent being Scorpion's Dance, The President, the Spy Master, and Watergate in 2022, and The Ghost, The Secret Life of CIA Spy Master James Jesus Angleton, which came out in 2017. He is the vice president of the Mary Farrell Foundation and publishes a popular Substack newsletter, JFK Facts. This week, he previewed his own special edition in which JFK Facts and the Mary Farrell Foundation will be highlighting 12 essential documents believed to be covered in the executive order and how they might finally unlock the mysteries of the JFK assassination, including whether Harvey Lee Oswald was indeed the lone gunman, which is the official story of that day in Dallas, November 22nd. So thank you, Mr. Morley, for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Kelly. We've got a lot to talk about.
And only 20 minutes. Well, you know, I was a little nervous walking into this interview because I have been very interested in this subject since I was a very small girl. This is something that is great interest to me, heart and mind, and I know that it is an unwieldy subject. So I was trying to find ways when preparing to sort of narrow this down so that we can have a good conversation and be illuminating without, you know, I don't know, without getting too unwieldy and going off
down rabbit
into tangents. There you go, rabbit holes. So I guess let's talk a little bit about the executive order. So can you explain what it says and why folks are disappointed today?
Well, I mean, overall, it's very welcome, but it's only a statement. And, you know, it's a plan, right? Trump didn't say documents are going to be released in 15 days. He wants his aides to give him a plan and assign that job to the Attorney General, the National Security Advisor, the Director of National Intelligence, and the FBI Director. So those officials are going to come up with a plan, and it's due on February 7th. So we don't know what's in that plan, and that's a first key step. But what we do know from long years of experience in recent years with the release of JFK files is the CIA has a practice, it's consistent over time, of resisting full disclosure on this issue, and indeed resisting all legitimate questions. All of these documents were supposed to be released 8 years ago. So the CIA has had the ability to prevail on two very different presidents, first President Trump in 2017 and Joe Biden in 2022, to continue to give the CIA ultimate control over these records. And hopefully Trump's order will bring a stop to that. So, but what's important to understand is Trump said he wants full and complete JFK disclosure. Okay. That means not only the 3,000 plus documents in the National Archives that you referenced before, but also JFK assassination documents that are not held at the archives, but are still at FBI headquarters and CIA headquarters that they don't want to give to the National Archives so that they are not released under the JFK Records Act. And one important thing is that the plan, we need to make sure that the plan encompasses all JFK records known to exist, not just the JFK records that are held by the National Archives. So, that's the first point. Second point is the MLK and RFK records. They're a more complicated question, and Trump's order appropriately gives his team more time to come up with those, because RFK and MLK records are not collected in one place. They're not as well organized as the JFK records, and it's going to take more time to figure out how to collect the whole universe of MLK and RFK records. So I want to hold off on commenting about that and really just restrict myself to the JFK records.
Absolutely. Just to clarify something. So I think it was in 1992 that all the records were shifted over to the National Archives. So you're saying that there are records in other places that weren't scooped up and
yeah, but I mean, what happened
repository?
What happened was we didn't really have full JFK disclosure until the late 1990s. This was the first time that the general public could go in without any gatekeepers and see the records related to the assassination and the multiple investigations and see it for themselves. So as those records came into the public view, a couple of million pages, historical understanding of the assassination, the events leading to it, has really been transformed. We have a much deeper and more granular understanding of what happened in November 1963 than we had before. So that's a big step forward. But in the process of releasing those records, that very act of release identified other records that the CIA and the FBI had never given to the National Archives, which are clearly related to the assassination.
Yes.
So they've been dragging. So first of all, they didn't comply with the law. It should have happened 8 years ago. And when they did comply with it, they held certain things back because those things are embarrassing to them and they don't really want to talk about it. So the point of the JFK Records Act, passed unanimously by Congress, and the point of President Trump's order, very sweeping in its language, is it's time to stop this monkey business and just put it all out there.
Yeah.
So hopefully that can happen. But, we need to see the plan first, because these agencies, CIA and others, they have ways of prevailing. And we've seen that again and again. They have ways of prevailing. So we need to watch this process very carefully to make sure that it really actually happens.
Right. Because, and I think I read this on your Substack, you suggested that they could come back with their plan, and the plan could be, we recommend we hold off on this, or we recommend that we study this further.
Absolutely. And, the language of the executive order does not preclude the CIA neutering the impact of the order. So that may be hard for people to understand who aren't in Washington. The arguments become legalistic. They become embedded in policy and secrecy questions. But we need to keep the big picture clear. There's a clear mandate for full disclosure, and the government should just implement it swiftly and disregard these overblown claims of the secret agencies.
I want to ask you, before we get to the nitty gritty, there's a question I plan on asking you towards the end, but you mentioned that the entire landscape of understanding this assassination had changed once the records were started to be released in the late 90s. Now, as a young girl and a young adult in the 80s and 90s, it was pretty taboo to go out there and say, I believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was not the lone gunman. And you remember the vitriol that Oliver Stone received with the movie. The debate was very narrow. It was over whether or not there could have been a lone gunman, one gun, more than one gun. I feel like today the debate is not about whether or not there was a lone gunman, but that there was a conspiracy. The debate is over what that conspiracy is.
Yeah,
I
and
feel like it's shifted. And is that because of the records, or is it because of just the zeitgeist that people just don't trust the government and they're more inclined to believe that there was a conspiracy?
a combination of the two. I mean, there's a much broader public understanding of how weak the government's official story was.
Yeah.
And for years, anybody who questioned that official story and the obvious errors and lies that are built into it was considered a conspiracy theorist. And so their
Yes.
corrections to the record were just dismissed. Well, as people themselves got to look at these records, they realized that wasn't fair. That's not right. The people who are criticizing the official story aren't crazy. President Harry Truman, 1 month after Kennedy was killed, called for the abolition of the CIA. Now, he didn't say the CIA killed Kennedy, but the timing of that is unmistakable. He clearly thought that that the president might have been the victim of CIA dirty tricks. Harry Truman thought that. He wasn't a conspiracy theorist.
Right.
Lyndon Johnson, the man who appointed the Warren Commission, said privately he didn't believe its conclusions, and he believed his predecessor had been killed by political enemies. Okay. Richard Nixon had his suspicions of the CIA on this. So this is not some eccentric or idiosyncratic point of view that was invented by crazy people. This is what men of power right around JFK believed. And they include, I might add, Jackie Kennedy, the president's widow, and Robert Kennedy, the president's brother. They didn't believe the official story. And they said so. So what we're talking about is something that's, like you said, it's kind of been taboo, and there's a lot of, mean-spirited discourse, ignorant discourse about conspiracy theorists. But that's going away. And there's the historical record of the assassination, which is much more clear and firm now and more broadly based in the population. And then, the other factor is the continuing secrecy. So people are suspicious already, right? The lone gunman theory was never particularly credible. And then if you blow the deadline by 8 years, well, of course, people are going to say, we don't believe you. And they're going to be more likely to say it. So, the CIA's stonewalling has really encouraged all of these doubts. Now, the good thing is, we don't need to do conspiracy theories. We don't need to do craziness. We just need to see all the records.
Right. And then put it out there and let people decide.
The records.
Yeah.
Right. No more game playing where the CIA says you can have these little tidbits, but we're going to control all of this and you don't have, please go away. That day should be over. Let's hope it's over.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some tidbits. Biden said he was going to release the documents during his tenure. And I understand from your writing that there's more illuminating information released back in 2022 about the CIA's knowledge of Harvey Lee Oswald, indicating that the CIA was following his activities, including his defection to Russia in 1959, his contact with the pro-Castro, anti-Castro activists in New Orleans. They were reading his mail. He had contact with a Soviet intelligence officer in Mexico City in '63. This all conflicts with their earlier claims that they did not know who Oswald was or knew very little. Can you talk a little bit about the information in 2022, and how that has lended itself to this broader story about the CIA? Now, I know you don't go out there and you don't say, I have a smoking gun and we know the CIA was responsible for the assassination, but you do say that their lying causes us to suspect anything that they've said heretofore about this.
It's important for people to understand just what has come out in the last 20 years, because it hasn't been well covered by major news organizations, which just turn their nose up at so-called conspiracy theorists, which spares them the burden of trying to understand what we've actually learned that is new. And we've learned a bunch of things that are new. First of all, that the CIA's surveillance of the accused assassin is far deeper and more prevalent than the CIA has ever admitted, okay? The CIA watched Lee Harvey Oswald from November 1959 to November 1963. Over those 4 years, they gathered 180 plus pages of information about him. And then when he was arrested and charged with killing the president, they turned around and told the FBI and the Warren Commission and investigators they didn't really know anything about him. Okay. So the story of it, the so-called lone nut, I mean, what we've learned in recent years is that's simply a false story. It's a cover story. Oswald was not a lone nut. He was a known quantity to top CIA officers who were reading his file 6 weeks before Kennedy was killed. So the Warren Commission was not a real investigation. It was a compromised and controlled investigation, and we know that now. So that's part of the imperative for full disclosure. We've learned other fascinating things. The CIA itself did not believe the lone gunman theory. A week after the assassination, the CIA's station in Miami launched their own internal investigation of JFK's assassination. They did not investigate Oswald, the so-called lone gunman. They did not investigate Fidel Castro. They did not investigate the KGB. They did not investigate organized crime. The CIA's prime suspect in Kennedy's murder in the days that followed right after the assassination were anti-Castro exiles known to the CIA in South Florida. We only learned that in a document that was released in 2017. And we don't know what the results of that CIA investigation were.
Right.
So another reason that the government itself doubted the lone gunman theory. So that's what we've learned in recent years. We've learned a lot on that score. What are we?
That's incredible.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely incredible. What are we going to learn? We're going to learn more about CIA operations around Lee Harvey Oswald and what this indicates. And it's hard to, make firm statements when you don't have all the records and the CIA is lying. What it looks like is Oswald's being manipulated, for some intelligence purpose. Was that part of a conspiracy to kill the president, or was that, incidental to the assassination of the president? I don't think it was incidental, but we need all the records to know. We don't need to conspiracy theorize. We need all the records. It's that simple. So will we get it? Still to be determined.
So it seems as though that you are zeroing in on the CIA.
Yes, and let me say very specifically. People say, "Is there a smoking gun?" Yes, there is. I mean, I can't swear that it's a smoking gun, but it's going to be pretty close. And it's this. It's the personnel file of a CIA officer who was involved in the surveillance of Oswald. This file was never seen by JFK investigators, okay? It's highly classified to this day. The CIA has possession of it. We know that from a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit. This file, when it's released, and it should be released quickly, will show, I believe, that there was a CIA operation targeting Oswald starting in January 1963 that has never been disclosed, okay? Now, is that an operation to kill the president? Probably that's not the way the CIA described it to itself. They probably described it as some kind of counter-subversion or counterintelligence operation. But this one file, it contains 44 documents from 1962, 63. This will show that a fundamental aspect of the JFK story has been withheld from the American people by the CIA. Now, will we get that file soon? The CIA is going to fight hard to prevent disclosure because it's going to be very embarrassing if it is disclosed. But I think that given the sweeping nature of the president's order, we can get it. And we might have what people have been looking for a long time, a JFK smoking gun.
What would be the reason why they would keep the agent secret? Is his very name indicative of something else?
The name of the agent is known. His name was George Joannides. He was a career CIA officer. He died in 1990. The reason that they keep this secret is because Joannides was not a rogue officer. He was not, and I would say he's not a co-conspirator in the death of the president. He might have been an accessory after the fact, but he wasn't a co-conspirator. But what he was he was carrying out the order of senior CIA officials. And that's what these files will show. who was giving the orders that targeted Oswald while JFK was alive? That's the key question that we should be able to answer if we get all of these files.
Now, when you say targeted Oswald, what do you mean by
I
that?
mean, they launched a secret operation that would use Oswald for intelligence purposes to generate propaganda around himself, around the group, the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, which was a leftist group which supported the Cuban Revolution and advocated against U.S. intervention in Cuba. And the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, like leftist groups in this period, were targeted by the CIA and FBI for dirty tricks, for disruption and destruction. And the operation that involved Oswald, when I say targeting Oswald, they targeted Oswald by targeting the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, which was considered a legitimate target of, CIA operations. And so that's, I think, what we're going to learn is that operation that eventually made Oswald a public figure before Kennedy was killed. That operation was approved at the highest levels of the CIA.
Wow.
Yeah. So now people say, well, Jeff, that's wrong. You don't have any proof. I know this story very well. And the whole story of George Joannides was unknown until I found him and started interviewing people in South Florida who knew him and who worked with him in the CIA. And so, you know what? I could be wrong. I was in kindergarten when Kennedy was killed. I don't have a high-level security clearance. I'm just another guy who goes around and reads a lot and talks to people. And this is what I think. Am I wrong? Well, if I'm wrong and I'm spreading something that's unfair to the CIA, it's incumbent on them to release it and say, look, Morley's wrong. Something else was happening. You know what? I'm not afraid of that. There's only one party in this exchange that's afraid of full disclosure. That's the CIA, right? I'm not afraid of full disclosure. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. It's happened before and it'll probably happen again. But this is my best guess about what's going on. And it's not a theory. It's records that need to be made public.
Right. Well, how does the defection to the Soviet Union play into this? Did he legitimately defect? And you think that the CIA brought him back under certain circumstances, that he was vulnerable, that they were able to turn him because of that by bringing him back? Or does this play into a broader cover story?
Well, Oswald goes to the Soviet Union through Helsinki, Finland. Okay. He's a 20-year-old dyslexic high school dropout who's taught himself Russian. And somehow he knows to go to the only capital in Europe where you can get a visa to go to the Soviet Union quickly. If he had gone to Berlin or Paris or London, if he had gone anywhere else, he would have been stopped dead in his tracks. So I think, and we don't know how Oswald got there. This is another detail that has emerged in recent years. So it looks like he was assisted. He was certainly watched and monitored after his return to the United States. So nobody ever forgot about him or lost track of him. He was followed from Minsk to Moscow, back to Texas, to New Orleans, to Mexico City, and back to Dallas. Every stop of the way, the CIA was informed where he was. And they knew his complete biography at every step of the way. And it was not the right hand didn't know what the left hand was doing. It was a half a dozen people at the top of the CIA who handled this file. So the story stinks. Okay, it stinks. And if you make a conspiracy theory out of it, people will point at you. I don't have a theory. I just want to see the records. But everything I'm telling you is absolutely true.
And this might be out there, but I'm just going to ask you, do you have a theory about who killed the president?
What it looks like is, I don't have a theory. The preponderance of evidence tells me the president's killed by enemies in his own government who have the ability to make the crime look like something else, i.e. covert action capabilities. That could be CIA, that could be Pentagon. Whose idea was it? The Joannides file will probably shed light on that. Of course, people are going to build in plausible deniability to whatever they do. So I would just say the evidence indicates the president was killed by enemies of his policies high in the Pentagon and the CIA. There's some people who you could say are plausible suspects, but that's about all you could say. You couldn't say there's proof beyond a reasonable doubt or anything like that. No, plausible
Right.
suspects only.
After decades of watching this story and researching this story, how do you feel about the idea that there was such powerful interests in getting rid of Kennedy, that the anger or whatever rose to the level that this could even happen? I mean, you're
Yeah.
at an age now where and you know Washington, you know the politics, you know the government, like the hubris that would be evident enough for a plan like this to be hatched just seems out of this world. But
well, right. But if you understand the national security milieu in the early 1960s, it was very paranoid. I'm talking
yeah,
about senior government officials, and so the idea that somebody like Kennedy, who said, let's disengage with Cuba, that wasn't just a liberal policy option. That was a favor to communists. Okay. So Kennedy wasn't just weak in the eyes of these people. He was actually a traitor and a menace to national security. That's how he was viewed by people at the very top of the CIA. And we know their names. I'm not making this up or smearing anybody. Same with the Joint Chiefs. The leaders of the U.S. Armed Forces unanimously were very much against Kennedy's policies in Cuba and Vietnam and the Soviet Union in 1963. The Joint Chiefs say that in their own history, that they were very alienated. So we know that hostility was there. Kennedy was aware of it. He talked about it with aides, about how dangerous he felt the situation was. So the context is important. But when you understand that, there were people who thought this way and thought the president was a national security problem that had to be solved. They didn't look at it as an assassination or an extra constitutional thing. They thought it was a constitutional correction. They thought they were restoring the American government and ending kind of Kennedy's, imperial presidency that was denying them what they wanted to do.
I don't know if you've watched the podcast with Rob Reiner and Soledad O'Brien.
I thought it was terrific. I was interviewed several times.
I haven't watched it yet.
Yeah, no, very good. Very good.
They make some clear assertions that there were a number of gunmen, that Oswald was a patsy, that they name individuals. How do you feel about their conclusions?
I thought the series was very well researched. I'm interviewed in several of the 10 episodes. I think that last episode where they point out, these 4 people were the gunmen, I thought that was the weakest. I don't think that's merited by the evidence. I think there's evidence that there were other gunmen in Dealey Plaza, but it's limited, circumscribed, and has to be handled carefully. I don't think that the failure to identify specific gunmen weakens the overall point that the president was ambushed by his enemies. I think that important point that Rob and Soledad got exactly right.
Yeah. So I know we've run out of time, but and I don't want you to feel pressured to spoil your own newsletter exclusives. But what are some? You mentioned the file, the Unides file. Is there anything else that you really want to see revealed?
Yeah. So I'm doing a series on JFK facts where we're going to look at about 12 items that JFK researchers generally agree, are out there, they exist, and we should see them. So there's a couple of other. James Angleton, the man who was in charge of the surveillance of Oswald for 4 years before Kennedy was killed, he has some heavily redacted testimony to the Church Committee in 1975. We want to see that. There's a summary of CIA operations in Mexico City, mounted with the help of the Mexican government. These are the operations that captured Oswald's presence in Mexico City. Those documents are not from 1963, they're from 1962, but declassification will help us understand how that surveillance of Oswald was taken and what we don't know about it. There's a memo from Arthur Schlesinger to President Kennedy about reorganizing the CIA. We have parts of this memo, but a key page, an entire page, several hundred words are still redacted. So those are 3 examples of heavily redacted documents known to exist in the possession of the National Archives. Those documents, if they wanted to release them, they could do it tomorrow. They could do it in 48 hours. And the fact that we're not seeing them indicates that the CIA is slowing this thing down. We see that already.
Yeah, and they could be potentially very explosive if revealed too.
Yes.
So
yes,
they have a great interest in slow walking this. Yeah. Well,
yes.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed meeting you. This is a real pleasure for me. I've been following your work for some time and really respect it, and the thoughtfulness and judiciousness of your research is just superior to a lot of stuff out there today.
And if I could say one thing, because I wanted to appear on the Quincy Institute podcast, we need to understand the implications of Kennedy's assassination, the long-term implications on U.S. foreign policy, because since there wasn't real accountability after Kennedy's assassination, this aggressive faction in the national security community had impunity. And that meant that they would have influence over a disproportionate influence over U.S. foreign policy. And they have ever since. So the policies of regime change, of intervention, of covert action, they're really baked into place after 1963 when the CIA is not held accountable. So one part of the story is what we're going to learn, but the other part of the story is more reflective, is what does it mean for it today? And what has that meant for U.S. foreign policy? And I wanted to convey that to the Quincy Institute audience. This is part of what you guys are doing.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate that. And I just want to say, I had met Oliver Stone, and I had mentioned before how much blowback that he had gotten for the movie. But these are some of the themes that he was exploring in the movie. And what was focused on was maybe the holes and maybe some of the leaps that he made at the time before a lot of this information was even revealed. And his critics focused on that. But I feel like the overarching message, the themes that you had just underscored about the impact on our foreign policy were right on. And that was dead set in the movie. And why I think personally, why the movie actually is a lot better and has stood the test of time.
It has.
Beyond all of the theories and everything, but it's the overarching theme of the paranoia of the time and the impact on our aggressive foreign policy post.
Yeah, it's a movie about what happened then, but it's also a movie about war and peace issues today. And that is why it is lasted. It's not some Hollywood movie that comes and goes. It resonates, and it's still on heavy rotation in cable every November because it still means something to people. It's not fiction.
Absolutely.
Recognize that it's not fiction.
Right. I think you hit it on the head. It means something to people that transcends whether this scene was correct or this fact was inaccurate or whatever. It's the feeling that it inspires, and that shouldn't be disregarded. I don't believe so.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for your time, and hope to keep in touch.
You'll be hearing from me. Take care.
Thank you.